quick snapshot where we want to talk about digital inclusion of local humanitarian action. So please bear with me for this very last session of today. I'm very happy that I see so many people of you here still in the room. And I hope you have enough energy spared for another quick 30 minutes. As always, let me start with some quick housekeeping rules. The event is still live streamed and still recorded and is going to be posted on the CHA website and YouTube channel soon, so please keep that in mind when you want to share your inputs, both online and here in Berlin. If you want to link us and share your experiences here in this panel, you can do so by using the hashtag CHA23. And you can also tag us with @Center for Humanitarian Action on YouTube, on LinkedIn, on Twitter, and Facebook. We will have a Q&A session in this quick snapshot as well. So if you want to feed in your thoughts and also questions, you're more than welcome to do that by just using the microphone over here. And for those of you online, please engage in the chat. This is going to be monitored by Sonja Höfelmann, and she will monitor everything and feed it into our discussion as she did before as well. If you prefer to send in your comments anonymously, you can send her a private message using the chat as well. And if you need any technical support online on Zoom, please send a message, a private one, to the CHA user, CHA Technical Support. So with that, let's dive into the topic of this last snapshot session, which is a very practical, very concrete example, actually, of linking digitalization and participation and local leadership, which is actually rarely, surprisingly rarely done. So I'm very honored to be able to do that together with Patrick Wink, who is joining us online. We can see you here. Patrick, it's a pleasure to have you. Patrick Wink is a research director at the Harvard Humanitarian Initiative and assistant professor at the Harvard Medical School and Harvard T.H. Chan School for Public Health. He's also a lead investigator at the Brigham and Women's Hospital, and beside this, also an adjunct associate professor at Tulane University's Payson Center for International Development. And as if this is not enough, he is also working regularly as an advisor and evaluation consultant to the United Nations and other agencies. Patrick, it's a pleasure to have you here. He wanted to come into Berlin in person so badly, and now we are very happy that we have technology, so you can dial in online. Patrick, nice having you.
No, thank you for inviting me. As you said, there's the. It's interesting because it does reflect a little bit the topic of the day, which is, in some ways, technology allows me to be there, and in reality, I am not there, and I am missing the richness and the informal nature of a lot of what was happening. So, it's technology is useful. It's a very imperfect substitute in many cases, and I'm sure we're going to discuss that more today.
We will. Thank you. Well, Patrick, what is so interesting about you and also your work is that your main research interest is actually on resilience and peace building and also social coherence in contexts of violence, conflict, and natural disasters, but still you ended to somehow in also examining the role of ethics of data and technologies in exactly these contexts. So I wonder if you can just introduce a little bit how you ended up in researching these topics.
Sure. I started my career actually as an engineer, and so programming is not something that was completely foreign to me. And in fact, I started my career in this area. I wasn't bad at it. I just really didn't enjoy it, and took on more practical work. And one of the things I realized is that I was really not trained on how to interview people, on how to consult, how to gather people's opinions, views, which is really critical when you're trying to engineer systems, when you're trying to solve problems. And so that really kind of led me to this aspect. Okay, how do we improve consultation? How do we work on gathering and engaging in discussion around those issues? And I found myself in this is how old I am, in Iraq in 2003 after the fall of Baghdad, and between transcription, translation, and coding, it took almost a year to be able to report on what people were sending very clear message that the process of vetting, the illustration of anyone that was a Ba'ath Party member was problematic, because in order to survive, you had to be a member of that party. And so as occupying forces withdrew all these officials, it really created major issue for how the system worked, for how public health would work, for example. And so that's the link kind of, the technology came as, how do we try to bridge that gap, that time gap, of making more timely available insights and enabling a more real-time dialogue on some of those policy choices. And so that's really when we started looking at, and say we, because I work with my wife, and we really started thinking, how do we take what's out there? There were already some online forms, some ways to do surveys on the web, but there really was nothing that was working offline. And so we started developing this, and then the Open Data Kit came out with their standards and was really helpful. And so we've just been continuing looking at these ways of advancing data collection, but data collection is very extractive. And so it really led me to look more broadly at what's the role of technology in this space, and how do we do it in a responsible manner.
Exactly. And then you also developed the Kobo toolbox. Can you explain a little bit how this evolved and how it then was used, and how it led you to now developing a new tool?
Sure. So it's a little bit what I described. It's kind of the very textbook, the simplest. Many of the innovators, many of the people working in the technology in the room will be familiar with that. You identify a problem, which is that doing data collection manually and collecting and then entering this data is just not very effective. I mean, it's useful, but it has major bottlenecks, including aspects of timeliness, because it takes a lot of time to enter the data. It has issue of quality control. And so you identify from your own experience a very concrete example where a potential technological solution is available. And so that was really the creation of Kobo, and we started using it for our own purpose. Then people started seeing it and asked, well, can we use it? So we made it available. And then as we made it available, people said, well, we'd like to improve this and this and this. How do we do this? And so it really led to create a nonprofit now that tries to maintain and offer Kobo as a free and open source tool for global good and trying to improve data collection. But in the process, again, data collection remains a very extractive aspect, right? And so came broader question as to how do we responsibly use technology? To go back to the example of Kobo, what we were doing was making it enhancing and enabling better data collection. Better in the sense of making it possible, but at the same time, we were making it possible to collect bad data. We were not addressing issue of sampling. We were not addressing issues of how do you ask good questions. And so with technology came a range of responsibilities that I found really fascinating to try to unpack and figure out how do we advance not just the technological side, but the practice, the responsibility, the approach that go with this. And so that led to other initiatives like the Data Pop Alliance that looks at new streams of data, social media data, other of data. How do we do this responsibly? Because the reality is, you can see it with ChatGPT, like our abilities are advancing so fast. They're advancing faster than our understanding of the issues that it raised, the problems and how to do it well. And so, and it's even advancing faster than the legislation, that the regulatory framework that surrounds the use of these tools. So there's a fundamental problem is, if you are implementing and leveraging those capabilities that are emerging so quickly without thinking about what you're doing, then of course it's a problem.
Yeah, indeed. And what is really striking is how Kobo, which is also working offline, and other tools are actually really providing an additional channel that we didn't have before to communicate, but still it's mostly used as just extracting data, extracting information as a tool to generate feedback and also provide reporting data instead of actively involving the affected people, but also other local actors on the ground. So I wondered, do you know, or did you ever ask yourself, what are the reasons behind that mechanism?
I mean, I think fundamentally, if you look at how the minority world has approached humanitarian action, it has been about what's the diagnostics, what are the needs, a very extractive approach, what are the needs, and here's what we are going to do about it. Now, technology can contribute to that, but the fairness is that I think it does more than that. You know, and we've heard, I think earlier, some examples around feedback, and there's still a lot of questions, but if you think even of the agency that is enabled, for example, through cash transfer, we've moved far, and I mean digital cash transfer, we've moved far away from a purely extractive approach, even for data collection. And practices, you know, in terms of participatory design and implementation of needs assessment, questions about who owns the data, and even issues of data retention and the responsibility or of those holding data to share access and enable communities to leverage and use that information, I think are really clear today. So I do think that overall, we've moved far away from this very extractive model in many ways. The question and the fundamental problem that remains is who is driving the agenda, and you know, who are making some of the fundamental choices with regards to policies, with regards to infrastructures, with regards to necessary conditions, and this is where I think this issues and this tension between the digital transformation of humanitarian action and localization is really crystallizing. Is if from a technology perspective you are imposing from the minority world to the majority world decisions around digital infrastructure, around security infrastructure, which has reasons. I'm not saying that these are unreasonable demands, but if you're doing it in a way that is excluding and reinforcing that dynamic of imbalance of power, as you call it, then we have a fundamental problems, because digital transformation and localization are now contradicting or not mutually reinforcing when you are taking this approach. And so the question is, how do we not do that? How do we not go to a local organization and one agency tell them you need to use this tool with these security conditions, and another agency goes to the same organization, no, you need to use that tool, and then when they leave, that the organization can use neither of them because they are proprietary and they are not designed for them to use. This is fundamentally wrong, and so we need to address this.
Yes, and you nicely did so with your playbook, Technologies in Humanitarian Settings. I hope you can see the playbook on the screen now. If you haven't downloaded it yet, there is a QR code showing now. And we will also post, of course, the link online. And I see many of the audience now having their phones and trying to access the playbook online. Patrick, can you explain us a little bit, what is it about and what does it guide you through?
So first, let me manage expectation. It's actually, after a lot of thinking, what came out is maybe deceptively, but it's very simple. It's just a list of questions. Early on in my career, you know, I was advised that whenever you're faced with a problem, ask yourself 300 questions, so that by the time you respond to those questions, you know everything that there is to know, and you know where the knowledge gaps are. And in some ways, it has stuck with me. And after thinking through how can we address this fundamental tension between digital transformation and localization, well, I resorted to this approach of asking ourselves the right questions. And in part, it's also because of the experience with Kobo, for example, where there are many, many guides, many playbook out there that tells you how to do participatory development, how to think about engagement, how to, and whether you are from the majority world trying to develop solution, but even for local organization, the reality is I felt that it was very hard to implement. The growth of Kobo Toolbox was very organic. It was user, it was informal consultation, it was our own use, but also contact with users in a much less structured and linear manner that many of these guides seems to suggest. And it's not that way. It's so much more messy in reality, so much more organic, that I thought that instead of trying to provide that kind of framework, it would be much easier or much more effective to help innovators, local, global, whichever level you are, guide you through what questions should you ask yourself.
Exactly. And I'm going to ask you one last question, but just giving the audience online and here in Berlin a heads up. If you have any questions for Patrick or any inputs that you want to raise, you can already line up here in front and grab the microphone in a minute and ask your questions. But let me quickly turn back to you, Patrick, before we do that. Well, I hope we can see the content of the guidebook now here on the screen. It really has different sectors where you can ask those questions. So with having these power imbalances and trying to actively use this knowledge and these capacities from local actors that have not been involved so much, which of these sectors is to your experiences one of the most important sectors for tackling these power imbalances? Do you have a favorite question or a sector that you find most crucial with that regard?
So immediately I thought I would answer this question with it's like asking my favorite child, but the reality is no. It's actually I don't feel that passionate about those questions, but I do think that they are. There's one area of questioning that I think is really critical, and that as you are innovating, you're not necessarily engaging with as strongly because you're thinking about how great your solution is, and you're thinking of the advantage and what it does, and technically how you're going to do it, and so on. I want to refer to something that humanitarians know really well, do no harm kind of idea. And so how do you think through not just, what is developed in a somewhat idealized case, but the reality of the ground, the messiness, the pressure that you feel? How does it work in those conditions? How are you going to think about this? And I like this series of questions because, of course, it forces you to think about do no harm to whom, but there's a danger there, which is that I will know better what risk there is for you. So let me tell you what is not going to harm you. That is a very imbalance of power way of thinking about do no harm. And so this questions fundamentally is about engagement, is about this relation with people served. And so I like this area of questioning. I mean, I think and I hope that we use a digital or a technology use system. So we have questions that deal with the technology itself, with the users, with the environment. But I do think that this area of questioning around risk is one that is really important to engage with, and again to engage with in a manner that is very, very inclusive. And I want to emphasize, because sometimes we have a bit of a romanticized idea of local and localization. This is very appropriate for local organization as well, because you may be working in the capital, maybe you're talking about refugees, and so that relation in between those different actors need to be consciously addressed, needs to be purposefully examined. And so the idea is not that you need to sit down and answer all these questions. Is more that you need to have these questions in the back of your mind and constantly revisit it. Are we working on unfounded assumptions? Are we clear about what we're trying to do? And so, again, I hope that this is a helpful way of approaching this.
Yes, indeed. And let me dive into one section that we have been discussing in the opening panel already. We talked about data privacy and data protection, and that is of course also a section that you address in the playbook. How does the playbook address data privacy and data protection towards sharing data and transparency?
Let me give you one example, because I think the reality is data protection, data privacy have been fairly high on the list of concerns, right? People know that these are important issues. And I'll say two things about this. One is that the default approach has then been a very technological solution to this. Well, let's create systems that are very robust, that require multi-level identification, that create a system that is safe, but then there are negative consequences to that. Let me give you one example in terms of security would be that you create a system that prints voucher for food distribution that have time stamps on them and are very secure, and it's linked to anonymization, so there's no names and things like that. Fantastic. For practical reasons on the ground, your distribution is delayed. You're not able to go on time. You're distributing those tickets too late, so that the date of validity the validity is passed, and so now people cannot use them. But you cannot simply just edit it in the field. You have to go back to the capital, and it requires 3 levels of permission to do those changes. And now you've delayed potentially life-saving assistance by weeks, just because the technology wasn't designed around sound principles, and that the added concern for security led to more challenges. Now, I'm not saying that these are not important. You need to have those concerns, but it can lead to really problematic implementation. I had a second example, and I'll try to get back to that. But I think that, again, it goes back to these issues of approaching issues of confidentiality and anonymity from from the perspective of a minority world organization who is primarily concerned about protecting itself, who is primarily concerned about its own safeguarding of the data they own, but not necessarily about the practical implication in the country for the people who face issues of a breach of data. There are specific areas, and that was one of the examples, was that, in a recent evaluation that I did, people think about privacy and protection. I found no evidence of existing data retention policy. So in other words, once you hold the data, how long will you keep it? And what are you going to do with it? At what point does it become archived? At what point do you simply decide, well, this data, we should not hold to this anymore? And so, there's so many issues. I can think of dozens of examples where people promise that there are non-digital alternatives, but the reality is we've become so reliant on biometrics and things like that, that we really don't effectively give people a choice. Mm-hmm. That in practice, sure, you may say, well, you don't have to, but if you don't do it, we don't know how it's going to happen. And so you're really not, we can talk about consent, what meaningful consent means, but in the end, when you're faced to, you get assistance or you don't, well, you create a world in which, or a setting in which there is not really a lot of option for people.
Yes. And let me finish with one very last question. Of course, a conference on digital tools and humanitarian action cannot go without mentioning ChatGPT, which is, of course, one of the most prominent examples of digital technologies. So I was asking actually ChatGPT which question I should ask you. And so it came up with one question that I think could be a very nice one for your last key takeaways to share with us before we close this little snapshot session. So ChatGPT is asking, what steps can organizations take to ensure that technology is used in an ethical and responsible manner?
Well, let me talk about ChatGPT first. And actually, maybe it touches on the answer to the question too. And I know in one of the earlier panels, someone was mentioning of how COVID-19, was a transformative or certainly an aspect of that. The reality of COVID and the reality of ChatGPT and the reality of a lot of what's happening with technology is that it gives me a sense that from my little office in North America, I know everything that is going on in the world, that I know exactly what is happening in this corner of northern Nigeria, and I can tell you what needs to be done to address the needs of the people in that location. And COVID, in many ways, while it was touted as well, it shows how technology can be used and localization and so on. Well, in reality, it showed how, as a minority world organization, you can retain a lot of power just by exerting digital controls over what is happening on the ground. And so to answer that question, I really think that what you need to do is not a technological solution, like for the ethical use of technology, is you need to relinquish power. You need to accept and understand that you are not going to be in the driving side, in the driving seat, but that you're here to support organizations on the ground that have their own technological know-how, that have their own tools, their own ways of thinking about how to deliver assistance, and you need to support that. I know it's very obvious. I know it's, maybe not or part of a woke discussion, as I've been accused sometimes, but in the end, that's the only way that you can reconcile the use of technology, the localization agenda, and kind of ethical ways of using technologies.
This is a very, very good last word, and I thank you very much for joining us online. It has been a pleasure to have you, and I'm sure us all will go through the playbook. Thank you for contributing to that one, and please ask yourself the questions that are also written down in the playbook. Thank you, Patrick, and thank you for the audience.
Thank you.
With that, I'm handing over to Ralph, who is closing the day.
Thanks, Darina. Not really me closing, because now we come back to the Muppet Show and our colleagues who've watched all day and will close with us and share their views. Let us just make sure this time they can sit and share their views with us. Maybe do it like that one. In a decent way. If you haven't been on site or online when we started and kicked off the conference, we have invited two rapporteurs for this annual conference who will be with us all day tomorrow as well, and have joined us from the very beginning, Arvi and Anita. So how are you? How was it on the balcony? Sleepy, hungry, but still ready to share some views, Anita?
Yes, I'm ready. I think it was a really good half day. Some takeaways from my perspective, from NEAR perspective. I think Patrick, in a way, stole some of my thunder. Had really good critique and good suggestions. I think personally speaking, I mentioned earlier, NEAR is not a digital expert. I learned a lot, so that's already, one check off of my expectations of coming. So hearing about the Kobo toolbox, but also some of the points that Barnaby raised, Kasim raised, like there are clearly technological solutions being used in different ways for different purposes. It does seem like there are a lot of technological solutions that are being developed to help us engage better with communities, and this is very key. I think there is a big gap between digital transformation and where the energy is in this technological solution finding and the efforts and aims of localization. So not as, when we heard Juliette speak this starting today, the challenges that she raised, that she faces, I did not hear many technological solutions being proposed to responding to those challenges. Language. I heard, as a mention on one of the panels, maybe the last one, but like language and in coordination. This seems like a possible avenue for digital technological solution finding. Yeah, and yet there's no good, the fact that today here we don't have technological solutions for active and engaged participation of non-English speakers is a problem, I think, and that's a problem that we at NEAR face also. So it's not, it's not just for CHA, it's for all of us. So I would say that, the center of gravity for digital solution finding, if it is to address the power imbalances within the sector, really needs to start moving towards finding solutions that work for local actors and supporting their leadership in responses so addressing their problems. That's probably my big takeaway. Yeah.
Okay, many thanks. Maybe we'll leave it with that for now. Abi, your key takeaway of the day, if you have one.
I have 3, so thank you very much. And I apologize in advance. I've been tasked to be critical, so I'll do my best. 3 takeaways from me. Number 1, this concept of power imbalance. We hear it, we've heard it in all presentations, but it seems to me that we treat it as if it's a thing that's over there. There's a power imbalance that's like existing separate from us. But with power imbalance, there are people behind that. So every time power imbalance is brought up, or every time somebody speaks here, I'd like for us to think, who benefits? Who benefits from this imbalance that we're seeing there? Who gets to be the expert? Who gets the material benefits? Who gets the salaries? And who gets the contracts? It's been said that, maybe the technology has been moving away from being extractive, but there are still extractive portions of technological use in the humanitarian sector. It seems to me that the question is, the technology that we're using, who is being served by this technology, right? Is it the big INGOs for, as Patrick mentioned, their self-preservation and their self-interest? Or is it what Anita mentioned and what Julian mentioned, is it to really tackle the issues that everyday community-based organizations are facing? Second point is related to that, is the mismatch, it seems to me. So as Juliet said, she mentioned some of her issues are untimely disbursements, burdensome due diligence and reporting, and then somehow there's a bit of a disconnect around discussion around big data, data security, and data privacy, which no doubt, I'm sure, are important subjects. But what about these everyday things, right? Some of the successes that Juliet mentioned were Google Sheets, Google Docs, and Zoom. So, how are we thinking about those kind of like basic things and incorporating that so that local actors are more capable or are enabled in leading the response to the leading humanitarian response? And then the third point that I want to say is, maybe not hypocrisy, which is a strong word, but maybe a bit of a cognitive dissonance in 2 parts. First one is with donor governments, right? Can I get a show of hands here who is British or who lives in the UK? Anyone? Okay. There are a few of us in the audience. I live in the UK. We talk about digitalization and, donors are really prioritizing digitalization. But let's look at closer to home. In the UK, They have digital-first strategy and digital-first policy. And the benefit system of the UK actually is digitized. But it's been described by the Human Rights Watch as disastrous. It's been described by the UN expert on poverty and human rights as the British welfare state is gradually disappearing behind a web page and an algorithm. How are we claiming to have expertise in these areas when in our own homes, these are not sorted out? The NHS, for example, I've experienced waiting in the phone with automated responses for like hours and hours. And who here really enjoys talking to a chat box, even when getting a refund for something that they purchased on Amazon? You know, let's think about our own selves and how we engage in technology in our day-to-day life, and think about, are we exporting these same faulty technologies in other places? And the second part is, you know, the cognitive dissonance within INGOs themselves, right? I mean, let's look again closer to our own homes and our own organizations. Think about the digital technologies that you use day to day in your jobs. You know, who here has tried to apply for a job in the UN and gone through their, to be honest, very archaic digital recruitment platform where you get a response to your application after 3 years? And then we talk about being responsive to the people that we serve, right? Think about the grant management systems that we have in our organizations. Think about you know, the financial tracking services that we use. And finally, you know, if we're thinking about how technology can enable change within organizations, I think two things actually are quite strong in this. First one is investigative journalism, digital media. And that's exposed a lot of abuses by INGOs, right? But why are we not talking about that? And second is whistleblowing. So there's been, in fact, whistleblowing social media accounts that have called out international organizations, not least for example, being racist. So there is a Twitter account out there that is, you know, anonymous and being whistleblowing to hold these INGOs to account. So I think a more critical reflection on power, and I'm keen for all of us to reflect on that in the next coming day and for us to really engage with those issues.
Thanks so much, Abi. Maybe hand back to Anita. Many thanks also for the anecdotal evidence from the UK, why you are decades ahead of, for example, Berlin, try to get a digital certificate, and then we talk about participation or whatever. But if I got both of you right, is it a fair summary? Well, we had an interesting discussion about the synergies and the overlaps of digitalization, of digital accountability, of locally led humanitarian action. But the structural issue of power balances hasn't really been touched sufficiently, and we need a more frank and honest discussion, hopefully tomorrow, about that. Anita, would that be your take as well?
Yeah, and in fact, I think it was Andrea was presenting a recap of some research, and there was like one line in it that said, let's not replicate the problems we have in the offline, you remember it, right?
Yeah.
the right way around, in the offline world, in the online world. And I think, this is really, really key. If we are consumed with kind of big data and data security, and, you know, we get tied up in knots about these massive issues, and we cannot figure out how to make sure someone who speaks a different language than you can participate in your meeting, we are doing something wrong, you know? And so yes, I think you summarized the point correctly, and just let's keep that one line that Andrea posted really front and center tomorrow when we come back.
What she shared actually has been from her job paper on digital accountability. You all find in print and, of course, digitally out there, as well from Darina, the one on locally led and agile project management. Final question, Avi, to you. We really hope to provide this forum, this discussion of the conference, its first day, with a diversity of perspectives and really make sure this is not a discussion of white old men. Has that worked out, or is there some homework for us to make sure we have different perspectives and more perspectives as of tomorrow?
I think for me, personally speaking, I can see the effort that CHA has really put into making this event inclusive of perspectives and voices from the global majority, from local organizations, from people from the Global South. I think it was mentioned in a kind of like pre-event discussion about visas, right? And about inviting people to come over. And I'm aware that some people have had some issues around visas. I think that's definitely, you know, not a learning because it's not a new issue as you've mentioned. But it's definitely something to take into account. But I do see the effort that there's been inclusion of different perspectives. So I do commend CHA on that one.
Thank you so much. In German, you would say, wir haben uns bemüht, which isn't perfect, but but we keep trying. Thank you so much to both of you. We will see you again tomorrow morning for kicking off the second day. So again, we will have some inspiring thoughts from your side. Thank you so much for all of you here on site and online, for all your patience. We keep overrunning. And now it's time indeed for having a beer and pasta out there. I think it's not yet raining. So if you run, you should get a dry pasta even. Many thanks for joining us. We come back tomorrow morning at 9:30 Berlin time. If you will join us again, of course, we highly appreciate if you joined us only for today. Many thanks for coming. We hope to see you very soon again. And take care. Good night. Have a good day, whatever, wherever you are. Hope to see you tomorrow. Thank you so much.